August 1939. We were evacuating the crown jewels, hiding from the Luftwaffe what Britain had guarded for 600 years. 3 trucks, darkness so thick you couldn't see your own hands. Only the headlights sliced the night with thin white blades. Then the driver shouted hoarsely, "Careful! Someone's on the road!" Brakes. A sharp swerve. A thud so dull it felt like my own heart stopped for a moment. The truck flipped over. Metal screeched. Crates flew forward. The light vanished. When I came to, the first thing I sensed was the smell of gasoline. The second, a stranger's groan. The third, the crate with the crown slowly sliding across the tilted floor straight into a spreading pool of fuel. The engine was hot, gasoline fumes heavy. I knew this state. One spark and everything would explode. I had 1 second, not 2, not 3, 1. A soldier was pinned under wreckage, screaming, unable to free himself. The crate with the crown slid toward the fuel. A man or the crown, a choice no one should ever make. But fire never asks permission, and I had to act. My name is Captain James Harvey. Royal Guard, Tower of London. For 10 years I guarded the jewel house, and in those 10 years I saw the crown countless times. But I remember the first time best of all. It was my first week of service at the tower. They showed me patrol routes, duty journals, visitor protocols. I listened, but my thoughts kept returning to one display case, the one in the center. When the time came, my mentor unlocked the jewel house after closing. The silence inside was different, deep, almost solemn. Lamps reflected in the glass, casting a soft golden glow. And I saw it. The crown lay on velvet, even, symmetrical, with that unmistakable weight no photograph can capture. No pomp, no theatrics. Just an object only centuries of tradition and craftsmanship could create. And in that moment, I understood something simple. If I was to guard this, I needed to understand what stood before me. Not just gold, not just stones, but the history of a country. Its ceremonies, its wars, its coronations, everything that shaped an empire. After my shift, I went to the archives and asked for permission to study materials for new staff. First, the general catalogs, descriptions of the crown, regalia, diamonds, restoration lists. Then extended reports, documents about the origins of the stones, old inventory books. I read everything they allowed, not out of curiosity, out of duty. If you bear responsibility for such things, you must know their true value, not monetary but historical. That was how I began studying the crown, the stones, the entire collection, not romantically, not mystically, just as an officer who wanted to be worthy of his post. And from that moment on, I knew. Every night shift beside these regalia had to be flawless, because they weren't just artifacts. They were what you had no right to fail, and that night I was ordered to escort the most precious of them all, the Imperial state crown. The phone rang at 8:30. I was on duty in the jewel house. The crown lay in the center on its dark velvet cushion, a quiet darkness in which history slept. Captain Harvey speaking. Code Raven, evacuation of regalia, immediately. The voice of Sir Owen Morshead, Royal Librarian, was calm, but underneath it I heard something he tried to hide. Where to, sir? Windsor, tonight. You have 3 hours. You personally escort the Imperial State Crown. 6 guards, 2 jewelers. They're already on their way. Pack everything that cannot be replaced. Understood, sir. The line went dead. I looked at the crown, at the gold that didn't shine. It breathed with weight. At the spinel, the Black Prince's ruby, that never sleeps. 10 years I stood beside it, 1,000 nights. But tonight, for the first time, I had to take it out of this hall, and I began to act. We gathered outside the jewel house in 20 minutes. 6 guards, 2 jewelers from Garrard's. I checked the seals, keys, and the evacuation plan. I left the crown for last. When its turn came, I hesitated for a moment, because I knew this object had looked death in the face more than once, and every time it survived. 9:30, Jewel House. Silence so dense even a breath seemed too loud, lamps dimmed like during ceremonies when no one is meant to see too much. The crown rested at the center on its velvet cushion, not shiny, not theatrical, real, heavy. From the side it seemed almost alive, breathing with the stone chamber. I picked up the receiver. "Captain Harvey speaking." A pause. The kind that appears when someone chooses words they shouldn't speak aloud. Then, "Code Raven, evacuation of regalia immediately." Sir Owen's voice always sounded steady, but this time something trembled in it. Subtle, hidden, like a wire under tension. My stomach tightened. "Where, sir?" "Windsor, tonight, 3 hours." 3 hours. That meant the situation was critical. "You personally escort the Imperial State Crown. 6 guards, 2 jewelers, already en route. Closed channel only, no internal lines, no messages, no communication except by my command." I froze. Such orders are given only when a country stands one step from disaster. "Pack everything irreplaceable," he added, "and be careful." "Understood, sir." The line cut off. I lowered the receiver and looked at the crown. In the darkness, it looked older than any war, any empire that had risen or fallen. The gold didn't shine, it absorbed the light. And the spinel, the Black Prince's ruby dun, lay like a drop of blood that never dries. I had stood beside it 1,000 nights, but this night, for the first time, I would take it from the hall where it had survived centuries. A weight of responsibility pressed on me clearly. It felt physical. They taught us one rule in the tower: if the crown leaves its pedestal after sunset, something has gone wrong in the world, and I began to act. We gathered again, 6 guards, not all from my unit. 2 had been pulled from other tower posts, some without proper uniforms to avoid attention. 2 jewelers from Garrard's, pale, clearly dragged from night work, but already in white gloves. No one spoke. No one made eye contact. I checked seals, keys, triple-layer packing protocols, routes we weren't allowed to discuss even among ourselves. No notes, no records, everything memorized. The light above flickered, tiny detail, but tonight any detail felt like a warning. I left the crown for last. That was protocol. Pack the most valuable item last, to minimize exposure. When its turn came, I hesitated again. This thing had looked death in the face, not once, every time. It survived. It now stood between me and the darkness settling over London. I put on gloves and lifted it. The room held its breath. When the crown rose a few inches above the velvet, the tension became almost physical, as if we were touching not gold, but the spine of the nation. I placed it into the crate, locked it, sealed it. And for the first time in many years, true darkness fell in the Jewel House. We had been driving almost an hour. London disappeared behind us. Black, blackout dark, cut off from the world as if switched off entirely. Our truck went first. 2 others followed at safe distances, no headlights, only short encrypted signals. A convoy of 3 vehicles no one was supposed to see tonight. The road to Windsor wasn't long, but in darkness it stretched endlessly like a corridor with no exit. We drove slowly, carefully, avoiding even minor risks. I sat in the back with the crates, strapped down with belts and reinforced ties. Inside them, part of the jewel house, insignia, symbols of authority, relics that had shaped the face of the empire for centuries. Not everything, but the priority items. 10 years taught me these things like soldiers learn their weapons. What was fragile, what had been restored, what couldn't be tilted, what needed 2 hands or 4. Not out of romance, out of duty. The darkness deepened. The road emptied. No lights, no cars, no voices, only the engine and faint signals from behind. In that silence, my thoughts drifted back, not to myself, to what we carried, to everything these regalia had witnessed before tonight, and the first page of that story began far from England. The engine hummed steadily, monotonously. Darkness outside stretched like an endless strip, and after a while the road no longer felt like a road, just noise, faint vibrations, a night that refused to end. On trips like this, your mind drifts backward. Not to yourself, to what you're carrying, to the things lying in crates under your feet. Symbols that had survived kings, wars, betrayals, fractures, reunifications. And in the stillness of that truck, the first picture flashed into my mind. Sharp, sudden, like a spark in the dark, the 14th century. Abu Sa'id, Prince of Granada, comes to Peter Wernge of Castile to negotiate. His realm needs allies, needs money, needs time, and he brings what he can offer as proof of his seriousness. Fabrics, silver, jewels sewn into his garments. Among them, a large red stone. Negotiations don't last long. Pedro was not known for patience. Even then, he was called the Cruel. And unlike legends, the name did not come from poetry. The prince is killed during the meeting. No ceremony, no build-up, an order, execution, silence. When they search his belongings, they find the stone. It is taken to the royal treasury. One more item in a world where jewels paid for alliances, betrayals, and power. Then civil war erupts. Pedro against his half-brother Enrique de Trastamara. The country breaks apart. Pedro realizes he cannot hold on alone, so he turns to the English. To Edward of Woodstock, the Black Prince, a commander feared even by those who had never seen his face. For Pedro, his final chance. The English come, they win, and when Pedro pays for his restoration, among everything he gives is that red stone. Recorded dryly in the archive, a red stone delivered by King Pedro, and so it arrives in England. Not as a trophy of honor, not as a relic, as payment, a remnant of a collapsing kingdom. Edward doesn't keep it long. Illness and campaigns finish him faster than his enemies. He dies without ever becoming king, and the stone goes to the Westminster Treasury, catalogued without distinction. Only decades later does someone retrieve it, someone who needs not decoration but a sign, someone marching into France not just to fight but to carve his name into history. Henry V. Before the campaign, he reviews the regalia. And this stone catches his eye. Dark red, dense, the color medieval scribes simply called blood. The records already name it, the Black Prince's ruby. Henry orders it mounted into his helmet crest, and he rides with it to Agincourt. And what happened there is known to anyone who ever studied that battle. Alençon breaks through the line, comes almost face to face with the king, strikes with an axe, right where the stone sits. The helmet bends. The king drops to one knee. For a moment, no one knows whether he is alive. But the stone is intact. The restoration record states it dryly, almost cruelly. The stone is without damage, as if the blow never touched it. I have seen that helmet in Westminster. It hangs above Henry V's tomb. The dent so deep it looks like the metal folded inward under a blow meant to split a man. Historians still debate whether that exact helmet was on his head that day. but the dent is real, and it always made me stop. Henry won Agincourt, but not time. He lived only a short while afterward. In 1422, still a young man, he died, and the stone returned to the treasury into the darkness where other things waited, having outlived their owners. Then came the Tudors, a time when the crown changed shape, form, and meaning. But the stone remained at its center. Henry VIII moved it from crown to crown, while reshaping England as confidently as he reshaped the regalia. Elizabeth I kept it among her most precious jewels, recorded in lists she signed herself. A symbol of continuity she refused to lose, and then history dropped sharply downward. 1649. The monarchy ceased to exist. The execution of Charles I split the country open. Cromwell's government believed not in symbols of power, but in order, discipline, and necessity. The regalia were declared unnecessary. A decree was issued, one that still sounds like a sentence. All crown jewels are to be destroyed. Crowns were dismantled piece by piece. Gold into crucibles to be melted. Scepters and swords under hammers. Stones sold off like raw materials, as if they weren't centuries of history compressed into crystal. England tore apart its own crown, coldly, methodically. The Tudor crown was valued at nearly £1,000. The Great Red Spinel at £4. The price of a pair of good boots. The Spinel was purchased by Daniel Elliot, a London jeweler who refused to accept the new order. He took the stone and hid it so well that for 9 years no hand touched it, not for profit, to keep it from disappearing along with the monarchy. And when Charles II returned to London in 1660, the stone returned to the regalia. No details in the chronicles, no elaborate descriptions. It simply became part of the royal collection again. The monarchy returned, but the regalia had not. Most were gone forever. So in 1661, the crown was made anew. Jewelers worked day and night reconstructing forms preserved only in sketches and vague descriptions. They rebuilt the monarchy by feel, gold on gold, stone on stone, frame on frame. And when they reached the Great Red Spinel, they placed it where it had been under the Tudors, in the front cross of the new crown of Charles II. A red point that had survived battle, a king's death, the fall of monarchy, destruction of the regalia, and 9 years of darkness, and still returned to its place, as if time had simply looped. The crown had returned. The stone had returned. The monarchy stood again, rebuilt from fragments, heavy but alive. But the tower never truly knows silence. Silence here always means something is gathering beneath it. That history is only pretending to sleep. A few years passed after the regalia were restored. Too few for the country to forget, but long enough for someone to dare. 1671. The tower in the early morning sounds different. The stone underfoot has a particular echo, soft, slow, like a heartbeat before an attack. The keeper walked his usual route. Glance right, glance left, keys in hand, the comfort of routine. The crown stood in the center of the hall. Gold, brilliance, weight, not just in metal, but in every century balanced upon it. The door opened. No creak, no rush. A clergyman entered. Dark robe, low hat, a pale face composed far too precisely for mourning. The keeper greeted him, politely as always, and that politeness became his mistake. "I'd like to see it more closely," the man said softly. The keeper leaned in, eyes on the crown, shoulder exposed. A moment, and the air shifted. A blow, not loud, not crude, precise, the kind thrown by someone who has no doubt. The keeper fell, the sound of his body merging with the shattering chime of glass. The priest no longer acted. The disguise dropped from him like old skin. He grabbed the crown from the cushion, held it for only a second, heavy, massive, nothing like the engravings. He tried to push it into a bag. It wouldn't fit. The crown was made for a throne, not for escape. Tall as authority, rigid as order. It did not bend, fold, or shrink, so he pulled out a hammer. Not ceremonial, a working hammer, the kind that in the right hands can shape things. Or break them. The first strike. Gold bent, one arch tilting aside. The second, stones popped loose, rolling across the floor like shattered pieces of night. The third, a cross snapped as if carved from wood. Blood. Colonel Thomas Blood. Worked quickly, feverishly. He wanted only one thing. To flatten the crown enough to hide it, carry it out, rewrite its fate. The crown rolled across the floor, clattering against stone, a hollow, heavy sound. The great red spindle fell free and struck the ground, lower, darker, almost muffled. Footsteps outside, shouts, someone running. Blood was caught near the gate, between two walls where the wind always feels colder. His bag was empty. The crown, twisted, broken, humiliated. Then came weeks of work. Jewelers bent over tables where fragments lay. Scorched edges, torn settings, scattered stones. They examined, compared, cleaned, rebuilt, like surgeons forcing bones to knit that should not be able to knit again. And the Black Prince's spindle lay in front of them intact, smooth, cold, without a fracture, as if every blow had passed through it, without leaving a trace. The restoration report contained one sentence, short as a verdict. The crown can be bent, stones can be dislodged, but this one does not change. Another jeweler wrote, gold bends, silver breaks, diamonds crack, but this is not of our world. The truck jolted over a bump. Headlights skimmed across the darkness, swallowed instantly by it. I felt the crate beside my boots, as if it held someone else's breath inside it. And somewhere between the road and the silence, another story surfaced. The one where the stone first found its place on a queen's crown. The road stretched between black fields. Inside the cab, silence, the kind that lets thoughts walk on their own. After the death of William IV, the throne passed to Victoria. She looked more like a young girl suddenly placed at the center of an empire. Small, reserved, with a gaze that held more will than experience. The old crown of George IV was far too heavy. 3 kilograms, massive, towering, built for another posture and another age. Jewelers saw that instantly. The crown intended for her had to be different, so they created a new one, lighter, balanced, but with the same historical stones. And the Black Prince's spinel once again took its place in the front cross. The coronation took place in Westminster Abbey. Thousands of guests, orchestras, crowds outside like waves pressing against stone. A moment when the empire shed its old skin. It was a ceremony full of confusion. New duties, new roles, mistakes in the presentation of regalia. But despite the chaos, that day the stone shifted from a medieval ritual into a Victorian one. After that, the crown was regularly updated, year after year, pétommes. State openings of Parliament, ceremonies, journeys, returns to the Tower. Gold tires. People do too. But the historical stones stayed where they belonged. Then came an incident that sounds dry in documents, but in reality should have echoed far louder. The passages were too narrow. Dresses and robes tangled like waves dragging each other. One careless movement, and the cushion with the crown slipped. The fall was dull, gold deformed. The circlet shifted, several settings burst out, small stones skittering across the floor. Restoration took dozens of hours, straightening the circlet, repointing, replacing lining, rebuilding the shape millimeter by millimeter. I had read those reports many times. And in 1936, when the crown was being prepared for George VI, I was allowed to see it after another restoration. The craftsman showed me traces of every intervention, lines of solder, old reinforcements, metal scars that would remain forever. And beside them, the stone, calm, clear, as if it hadn't moved through any of those stories, merely observed them. After the fall, the crown was essentially rebuilt, the circlet reinforced, the cross raised, the stone setting remade so it sat as if it were the crown's very heart, and Victoria wore that construction for decades, at ceremonies, in early photographs, in the official portraits of an empire expanding with railways, telegraphs, factories. Wherever she stood, before cameras, before Parliament, before the world, that same stone shone above her, unchanging. After Victoria's death in 1901, the crown passed from one monarch to another, Edward VII, then George V, and each time the stone remained where it had stood for centuries, in the center, like a heart that never misses a beat. Then came George VI, his coronation, 1937. A new imperial state crown was created for him. Fresh gold, new settings, new balance. But the Black Prince's spindle was placed exactly where it belonged, in the center of the cross above Colonnade, massive, cold, like winter glass. This was the version of the crown lying now at my feet in the crate. The silence around us was as dense as that in the abbey during the coronation. I was there. I stood in the honor guard. I saw them carry the crown to the altar, saw the lamplight break across its facets, saw it touch the head of the new king, and now, 2 years after that magnificent ceremony, I was carrying it through a darkened England, away from the sky that could tear open with bombs at any moment, away from the rising noise of war. It felt as though history had seized the stone again with both hands and prepared to test it, as it always had. And at that very moment the driver shouted, "Careful!" A figure appeared in the headlights. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a man stood frozen in the middle of the road, and the next second he collapsed directly beneath our wheels. The driver yanked the steering wheel left. Behind us, the second and third trucks signaled wildly. They managed to brake, but ours was already veering off the road. The impact hit hard. The truck jolted, spun sideways. Crates shot forward like heavy shells. Metal tore through the air. Canvas ripped and flew apart. When I opened my eyes, the first thing that hit my lungs was the smell of gasoline. Strong, thick, dangerous. I crawled out of the cab, groaning. Someone was alive. The first guard was on his feet, holding his shoulder. The second, Private Collins, a young lad from Yorkshire, was pinned under twisted metal, unable to move. And then I saw the crate with the crown. It lay on the tilted floor, sliding slowly downward, straight into a spreading pool of gasoline which crawled outward, gathering strength, creeping toward hot metal. Behind me, something hissed, the engine touching the vapor. This wasn't an explosion. It was the silence before an explosion. Seconds. That's all I had. Seconds, and not many. I had guarded that crown for 10 years. 10 years standing beside it, reading about it, studying every stone. And now, 1 second, the boy or the crown, I pressed my shoulder against a bent shard of metal pinning Collins down. It was wedged like stone, unmoving. I pushed harder, again and again. The metal shifted a few inches. Enough. Collins yanked his legs free and screamed, from pain, from fear, from a life that hadn't yet slipped from him. I grabbed him, pulled him across the gasoline pool, and together we rolled onto the roadside. The second team was already sprinting toward us. Someone threw sand on the fuel. Someone braced their shoulder against the truck's frame. A minute later, the crate with the crown was in the hands of the other guards. Hot, but intact. We transferred everything into the second truck and drove on into the darkness. By the time we reached Windsor, dawn was breaking. The light was cold, almost clinical, not what you want to see after a night like that. In a small room under the gaze of Sir Owen Morshead and 2 jewelers, We opened the crate. The crown lay level. One side of the gold was dented, several settings had shifted. The velvet cushion had darkened from gasoline vapor, but the shape held, and most importantly, every stone was still in place. The spindle in the front cross glowed firm and calm, as if the night meant nothing to it. Sir Owen looked at me. "Good work, Captain." Then to the jewelers, "We'll straighten the gold, remake the settings, everything will be restored properly." A pause. "And now the important part. The stones must be removed." I watched as they removed the spindle, gently as if it were an object that remembered every century it had passed through. Agincourt, blood, Parliament, and now, this night, the most valuable stones, the spinel, the cullinan, the koh-i-noor, and others soon were removed one by one, each wrapped in cotton, then in thin cloth, placed into metal containers, containers placed inside Bath Oliver biscuit tins, sealed, and lowered into a narrow passage beneath Windsor Castle. At a depth of 18 meters, they buried them, deep enough that no bomb in this war could reach them. There they remained throughout the war, in silence, in earth, in darkness that asks no questions. The crown was sent for restoration. Any damage to the gold could be repaired, but the stone demanded nothing, as always.